when you're being smacked across the face, it's because you did whatever you did. And you're like, yeah, I guess that is my fault.
This week, we had Alreen Haeggquist on the show. We had a meaningful conversation about learning your legal rights if you are sexually assaulted, the power of journaling, and how to overcome the shame of abuse. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Listeners, today our show is going to be focused on sexual assault and will be a little heavier than usual. Let this serve as a trigger warning. Today, Alreen Haeggquist is joining us. Alreen is the managing partner of Haeggquist and Eck and author of Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma. Alreen practices to advocate for women in sexual assault, harassment, discrimination cases, and much more. Today, Alreen and I will be discussing sexual assault within a marriage, how to seek help if you have been sexually assaulted or harassed, and overcoming trauma of all types. Welcome to our show, Alreen.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I would love if you can start by sharing with our listeners just a little bit about your background and story.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer here in San Diego, and I run a firm representing women who have been sexually abused and harassed, primarily in the workplace as well as with institutions. And that I have a profound desire to help these women because I myself grew up in a home where I was abused in all the ways, including sexually, emotionally, physically, and verbally. And so that really drives me to help women stand up for themselves because I see how it empowers you by not staying silent and speaking out and doing something about it so you can move on to the next chapter of your life.
Wow. Well, I so appreciate you being here and sharing and for the work you do. But let's just jump right in. Women have in the past, and maybe still now, are expected, in a lot of ways to be the one at home, raise the kids, and be quiet. What behaviors feed into women being silenced?
I mean, I think it's the whole, society, it's culturally, and it's your family. I mean, that's how I grew up. So, I just told you my father was really abusive. I had a mother who was there, and I really wanted her to protect me as she saw what was going on in the house, and she stayed silent. She never said a single word to protect her kids. And that kind of you grow up in this environment thinking that's how it is. You're just supposed to stay silent and take it, right? And I also grew up in an environment where my mom told me that, there was God, there was man, and then there was woman, like we were at the lowest level of what we were supposed
Wow.
to be taking. And so whatever he said, we needed to do. And so I think we're kind of, we grow up to not speak out and just, please other people and be submissive in a lot of ways. And I think as that changes, and we change cultural norms, we change societal norms. I think, for my daughter and other people's daughters, I think it's different now.
Mm-hmm. And how does that power dynamic of a husband, let's say, who earns all the money and makes all the decision affect the silencing that women may feel?
You think you need them, right? Like, I think that's the problem. Like, if you as a woman don't have anything of your own that you do, and I always encourage women to have figured out their own finances, have like a plan, not that I'm saying your marriage isn't going to work out or your relationship isn't going to work out, but have something for yourself that if you do need to get out or if you're out on your own for whatever reason, you know what to do. You know how the finances are held. You know how to pay your bills. You know how to earn money. And that option still exists for you because when you're just in a role where the man takes care of everything, you're accustomed to, well, he makes all the decisions for me because he pays for everything. And so therefore I just need to, be quiet and do my job at home and not speak out.
Mhm.
So again, I think by having one person have all the, I guess, financial control, it also affects, not staying silent because you think you have to be in that situation for the bills to be paid.
Yes, and I completely agree with you. And the longer I have been practicing in this area and the more that I've seen, I completely agree with you. And not to discount women who, they're coming in, they're like, but I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. But it's like, well, but for those of you who can make a difference, the young girls who still think, oh, I just want to get married and not work, it's like, oh, you set yourself up for just no freedom financially and even personally, which, is better in a marriage if you don't feel stuck. You feel that you have the freedom to make your own choices. So I agree with you on that completely. Um,
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how frequently do women report these types of abuses in marriage?
I mean, I don't know what the stats are, in marriage versus non-marriage, but if you think about, 50% of women are sexually abused, and that's a low number because it goes underreported, right? Like
Mhm.
there is, there's so much shame itself from the abuse keeps you from not speaking out, right? It's like a consequence of the abuse,
Yeah.
they silence it. And so as a result, I think it goes underreported very often. And that's why I think the people that come forward are so brave, for doing so. 'Cause I understand it's hard, it's not easy. But that's really the only way to get out of your situation is to speak out and not stay silent.
Mhm. And, you mentioned that your mom being silent, kind of lit a fire in you and not to be silenced. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think there must be, it's something inside for the women who finally say, I have to do something, right? Because there has to be that point where then they change that behavior and decide, as scary as it is, I have to speak out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, when I was young and my mom just didn't say anything despite, everything that was going on in our house and the way our father, I'm the youngest of 10 kids. So it wasn't like my mom didn't have an
Wow.
opportunity before me. She had been seeing this for a long time, but I had a lot of empathy for my mom, right? She had an arrangement,
Right.
got married to him at 17. She didn't really have a choice, and so I really saw her as somebody who was also abused, and I wasn't mad at her, I guess, for not saying.
Right.
When I had my own daughter, there is just this natural instinct to wanna protect your child is really when I was mad at my mom. Like, "Okay, how did you not say anything all these years, and how do you continue to protect this person and not
Not
say any."
you. Right.
Yeah, and not us, and so, um that made me mad at her, but the fire of my mom staying silent, that came way early came before my daughter because I never wanted to be like her. I just like that was one person you could emulate. Like, I am not gonna be quiet and not say anything and just let things happen around me, and just be mute, really. And
Mhm.
like the fire, I think is really like a trigger. Like I get triggered by not saying anything, and that's why it comes out. And I really can't be silent when I see something unjust and wrong. I just like, I have to blurt it out or say something about it, to stop the behavior. And that now, of course, many years later, it's like controlling it, right? It's putting it, it's
Yeah.
controlling that trigger so that you're effectively able to say what you need to say to get the behavior to stop.
Absolutely. Now, in your opinion, why do you think men think they can and or have the power to silence women?
I don't know. I don't know if they feel like they can or have the power. I just think there's also a part of us where we we stay silent because we want to please them.
Mhm.
We don't want to ruffle any feathers. We want everything to be okay. We don't want people to think, we're being, bitchy or obnoxious or being too aggressive. And so we play these roles, and then I think men expect it of us, and so they're like,
Mhm.
"Hey, my role is to have the power. I'm, the man of the house, and we kind of just go into these patterns. So I don't know, I think they're raised a certain way, and I think women are raised a certain way.
Yeah.
Continues, right? The power imbalance continues.
Right. And then, if that is, I think also within your belief system, then you see more things that reinforce it. And, you see reasons, they get away with it. So they keep doing it. And it's just, can be a terrible cycle probably that does continue to go on. Now how do you see being silent as a survival mechanism?
So in two ways, I think when for me at least as a kid, like everything going on, it was unsafe. It wasn't safe to speak out, right? Because of the consequences
Mm,
that would have happened, like, physically, like being beat up or something if I opened my mouth, right? So
right.
to stay quiet is like, yeah, how you're surviving to make sure nothing happens to you, and to your family. And like everybody else is staying silent, right? Like to me, silence is really the biggest gaslight. Like when, abuse is going on, people are seeing it, the adults in the room are seeing it, people that are supposed to protect you are seeing it. Nobody's saying anything, nobody's doing anything. And so you're like, is that really happening? Like maybe it's not happening. Maybe I'm just creating this whole thing in my head? And so I think that perpetuates the situation. So
Absolutely, because I do think that just what you said, sometimes I think women even then get caught up in that gaslighting and just what you said, like, is this happening? Is this really my fault? Was this my fault? Because that is probably a very common result of that gaslight. Like, well, because I tell you that this is your fault. You're the one who did
yeah,
this. This is on you, not me.
correct. And you're being told that. I mean, that's during
Right.
abuse.
You're being
When
told.
you're
Yes.
being smacked across the face, it's because you did whatever you did. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess that is my fault.
Hmm.
That kind of, I think when you have abuse as a kid, you kind of go into those patterns as an adult, right? Trying to appease and do everything you can to be the good girl or do what's right to avoid
Right.
consequences.
Hmm. Now, when I think this is a really good question as far as, for our listeners, because when do you step in as a friend or family member and say, hey, this is abuse. You need to get out. Right. Because I think that's where we wonder, why didn't anybody come like try to help me get out of this?
Right. And I think at any time you see it, right, you want to say something. I think sometimes what happens with people is like they feel like they have said it, right? They have seen their friend or somebody in an abusive
Mhm.
situation. They have brought it up, they've told them, I'm here for you. We will create a support network. But at the end of the day, it's really that person that has to do it. And sometimes I think people get, I don't know if the word is frustrated, but just like, I don't know how many other more times I can have this conversation with you, right? But like, I know it's
Right.
scary, but you have to take a step. Like, I will support you, but I can't literally, take you out of that situation. If you're an adult.
Mm. Now, how do you safely confront your abuser in a marriage or a relationship, like, where you're co-parenting and help us understand what you would suggest for that?
So me personally, I never confronted my abuser, right? I was a child. I never said anything. Me writing a book about my abuse and telling my story and no longer keeping it a secret is how I confronted my abuse, right? And
Okay.
by putting it out there. I wrote about it, but I was out of the situation. I was safe.
Yeah.
And then I wrote about it. And that's how I confronted it. I think when you're in it, I think it's really important for you to have the support so you're not doing it alone, right? Like, I think it is really scary that if I confront this person, I'm not going to be supported. There won't be anybody that believes me. I won't have anybody in
Mhm.
my corner. And so I think all of those thoughts circulate. And, where am I, if you're in a marriage, where am I going to live? Where am I going to go? If you're at a job, I'm going to get fired. How am I going to support myself? And so there's all of those like, what if going through your head. And I think if you have your support network built before you confront the situation, I think it's a lot easier to do. So that would always be my recommendation is if you're in the situation and trying to get out, get your people, right? Get your people, your tribe, and then confront
Yeah.
the situation. Whether it be lawyers, psychologists, friends, whoever it may be, but get the team
Mhm.
and then get the plan out.
Now, what would you say to a woman who thinks taking legal action after being assaulted or abused is too much or dramatic?
I think you've been fed into this idea that you're being dramatic, but there you should be dramatic. I mean, if you want to call it dramatic, you should be dramatic. If somebody is
Mhm.
hurting you and assaulting you, you should be dramatic and tell them you can't. And if you're unable to do that, that's when you go to a lawyer and they will help you stand up.
Mhm.
And so I think it's the abusers that are putting this idea that you're being too much and dramatic,
Right.
and you're not being too much or dramatic. So that's what I tell them.
Now, and that is good advice. I think that's exactly right. That's just so that there's nothing dramatic about being assaulted or abused. That is part of like gaslighting,
Mhm.
right? To think that you're being overly dramatic. Now, when there is abuse, at what point, should someone seek help from a criminal law attorney versus a family law attorney? Especially like if divorce is a factor. How do they understand that? Which I don't think, and this is for our listeners, right? Because the criminal law attorneys just defend criminals. They're not going to help you necessarily in this case, but I know our listeners need to understand, who if they are like, okay, I need to do something legally, where do they go?
So if so kind of like there's I know different lawyers, right, for all the different things. So I think if you're
Right.
in a situation where you are being physically abused at home or by somebody else, right, you file a police report. That's
Mhm.
taking a criminal action. You're not hiring a lawyer for that. That's really the state, right, taking action against the abuser, and they will decide whether to prosecute or not. Then, if you're in a marriage and you want to get divorced, you need to hire the family law attorney to help you navigate how to end the marriage and, get your part of the assets and move on with that aspect. And then
Mhm.
there's civil lawyers, which is what I do, which is getting money damages from the abuser for the harm that they put you through, right? So it's kind of, you can do three things. And it kind of depends on the situation you're in, which avenue you want to go in and which lawyer you need for that situation.
And it might be that there is, let's say that you've been sexually assaulted. And maybe they come see you first. Is it possible that you may say, okay, I think we need to notify the police as well, or maybe not. I don't know. I guess it's very fact specific.
Exactly. So typically in a sexual assault case, if they haven't reported to the police, we would recommend that they report it to the police. Um, and then, yeah, if they're in a marriage, it's like you need to get legal advice on if you want to leave the marriage, what that looks like for you. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like you can go to any attorney and they'll hopefully navigate you to the appropriate one for your situation,
Right.
right?
And, how, from a lawyer's perspective, do you support women who come to you, after being abused or assaulted?
So I feel like my role is to help them stand up for themselves, right? They have taken a really big step because like we talked about earlier, I think it's hard to report, it's hard to come
Mhm.
forward. They're really scared. So when they come into my office, like I'm sure they come into yours, they're really scared. They don't know their rights. They don't know what options they have. They don't know how to get out of their situation. They just know what happened was wrong. And sadly, like, they might have already been in a situation where nobody's believed them, right? Nobody's heard them, nobody's listened to them. And so I feel like my job is to listen to them, believe them, and then let them know what their rights are, right? These are your rights, these are your
Mm.
options. Because I think that's sometimes what women forget. And because it's so prevalent, but the thing is, our entire society says this conduct is wrong, right? There's no law that says it's okay to sexually abuse or assault a woman, right? Like none of our laws
Right.
do that. And so all of
Right.
the laws are written to protect you. And so I think when you know what your rights are and how much power you actually have, I feel like my job is to give you your power back, right? By enforcing those rights we all have.
And but I would imagine there is this mental block, and they come to you, but they're like, "But who's gonna believe me?" Right? What evidence do I have? How do we prevail?
Right. And so I say that's the situation with every person that comes in, right? They're so scared that, again, because they've been
Yeah.
in a situation where nobody's believed them. But that's why we
Mhm.
kind of team, like, we believe you, right? I believe you.
Yeah.
The people at my office believe you. And we have, uniquely at our office, a survivor advocate who's there, who specializes in, the neurobiology of trauma and how to talk to people, right? And so she's there
Mhm.
also to say, this is what you're feeling is normal. That's because you've experienced all these things, you think nobody's going to believe you. But that's not the case. Women come forward every day and people believe them. They enforce their rights and we do something about it. And so people have this, like, most women don't have this like pile of evidence to, to support their claims, right?
Right,
Like
right.
we listen to their story and then we put the story together based on the evidence we can collect and the information we can collect.
Mhm.
Story itself is evidence, right? What happened to you, your testimony, that is evidence. And so I think remembering that, like, you don't have to have a video of what happened to you. You don't have to have a photo of what happened to
Yeah.
you. So,
Now in California, can you, have a cause of action against your husband for sexual assault?
you can,
And I would imagine that, I mean, it doesn't happen all that often, but, um,
that you can bring
it
it. Yeah.
seems so. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yes, it doesn't happen very often. I've never had a case where a woman has brought a claim against her husband. They have brought it against their ex, but they haven't brought it while
Oh,
they're,
okay.
you know what I mean? They're
Got
not
it.
married. They're not still married. That you
They're
can't.
no longer married, but
Correct.
the abuse happened after the
Yeah.
marriage, the assault happened after, and then they go after them for
Yeah.
the damages.
Yeah.
Um, Now I know that you've represented individuals also, against big corporations and companies where there's that sexual harassment. Could you speak a little bit about that? Because I think that's awfully intimidating as well when that's happening in the workplace, whether it's the harassment or goes to that next level of, an assault. But I'm sure that's quite intimidating as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so kind of the same thing. It's like when a woman comes in, I think it's so powerful to know what your rights are, right? Like, this conduct is not allowed, right? Across the board, it's not allowed in the workplace. And there's strict liability for the employer when it's a manager that does it. And it's the employer's
Okay.
responsibility to keep you safe and not allow this conduct. Now, if they don't do that, then that's why you can sue them to enforce your right and get
Hmm.
money essentially for the harm was caused. And so I think letting them know, like, no, that's not okay. And for me, I
Hmm.
think, like I definitely thrive in situations where people think the law doesn't apply to them. Like, you all have so much power and so much money, you think you can get away with this conduct. And I feel like that's our job to tell you, no, you can. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how much influence you have or what, you're the CEO of whatever corporation. Like, the laws apply to all of us equally, and you can't treat women like this in the workplace, right? This conduct is not okay. And I think the more we do that, the more we can change the statistics and we can change the conduct that's happening.
Hmm.
So I think the conduct is really easy to go to work and not touch anybody. We do it every day.
I It's true, right? It really is. But too often, and it's, we say that so lightly, but I can't imagine how some women must feel, and they need that job.
Yeah,
They need the income, and they're so scared that they don't know what to do, and again, don't think that they're gonna be able to get relief.
right. Because this company has so much money. They have all these lawyers. Nobody's going to believe me. He's, whatever position he has at the company, he makes all the sales. Why would they believe me, especially for like a lower level employee or an entry level
Right.
position? They just don't think there's anything they can do. They have no choices. They have to take it. And so, that's where I feel like we come in and say, no, you don't have to take it. And, I can't promise you're not going to get fired for speaking up, right? That also on a
Mhm.
practical level, it's illegal, but it does happen.
Correct, but
you
it
know,
happens,
But
yes.
it
Mhm.
happens. And a reminder that you don't have to take it, right? Like, yes, that consequence might happen, but they're going to have to pay for it if that's the role they take, right? Because the law makes it clear you can't fire someone
Mhm.
for telling somebody to stop or reporting the behavior to a manager or HR or what.
Right, and it's not gonna, even if that happens, right, the relief is not always, as soon, of course,
Right.
as our clients would like it. However, if, you're in it for the long haul, it's worth it, and it allows you to stand up for yourself, but, I'm sure those are conversations you have often.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the beauty of it, right? When they come into the office, that is all of how they feel. They're so scared. They don't know how they're going to, pay their bills. They've lost their job. The company didn't believe them. After they reported, they got fired, and then at the end of the case, it's like they feel so good and they're so empowered and they found another job. They're doing something they love and they didn't allow what happened to them to continue. Right. And either they
Yeah.
help themselves or they help the next woman, for it not to happen to. So I love that of seeing them from when they start and where they end at the end of the case and just the transformation essentially of how they feel.
Absolutely, because it is, it's a journey. It's an empowering journey, where they are, and then hopefully they realize I was able to stand up for myself and then have others stand up for me, and it worked. Now, how do you begin to heal from sexual abuse? What steps would you recommend?
So I always recommend a therapist. I think getting a psychologist, on your side is really helpful. So I always recommend that to my clients, that they find somebody. And if they can't find somebody, we have our survivor advocate help them trying to find something that, is covered by their insurance or whatever, pay scale that they need. But I always think that's, number one is, get a therapist. And I also think just like helping them, like just I being aware that you experienced abuse and there are consequences, right? Like, um, just having the awareness that, you're not having these feelings and you're not having these behaviors out of nowhere. It's coming from the trauma that you experienced because of the abuse. And so just being aware of that and that you can change it. I always say you didn't make the mess, but you got to clean it up, right? Like you didn't do
Yeah.
it. You got to be on this journey to help yourself um, from what happened. So therapy. I also just recommend like earlier, getting like a team, getting a support group of people that believe you. And if you're in a situation
Mhm.
where you have a friend that doesn't believe you or, like people who question, why were you in that situation? You shouldn't have been there. Or you caused it. Or
Right.
that group
Mhm.
of people, they need to go. Like they're not supported. They're
Right.
you on this journey. And so you don't need to keep them around. There's lots of us who won't do that to you. And there's lots of other people that will support you because they've experienced it. So find them, right? Be around that group of people. Um, I also think like recognizing how far you've come, right? Like you're at this place and think of all the things, the good things, right? The gratitude. Like I know sometimes it's hard, but kind of going back to the basics of identifying all the good things in your life, all the good things you've done in your life and where you're at. And you're gonna get that again, right? But you have had like a setback or something that happened to you that has kind of taken that away from you, but you're gonna get it back. So those are some of my recommendations.
And that those are very helpful. Now let me ask you this. Do you think that abuse within a marriage or a close relationship, like a family member, does that make the situation harder or different for the woman victim?
I think so. I mean, from my own personal experience, with it was having my father abuse me, it causes, I look like my father. So I have my own, just like looking at myself causes that own trigger, And so I think when you have these family relationships or husbands, it's like there's no further trust in that, right? This is the most trusting relationship you were ever gonna have. And so I feel like the
Yeah.
betrayal is so much bigger and stronger
Mhm.
than it is for a non-family relationship. So I do think the
Right.
abuse is harder. And then there's the other people in the family, right? That comes into
Ah,
play, right? It could be kids or it could be siblings or it could be aunts and uncles. And then how do you navigate that relationship? now that you're speaking out about, you know, this family member. So I feel like that's another
That
complexity.
that is a whole nother level that you're
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that then now you have to handle those emotions, those conversations, and not everyone may be supportive.
Yeah, because they might not be ready, right? They're
Yeah.
not on the same path and journey that you're on, so they might not be ready to have
Mhm.
conversations. And so I think those are all they add levels of complexity um, that don't arise in a non-family relationship.
Now you mentioned, that in your book that your body refused to keep quiet. How did that present itself? What led you to that realization?
It definitely wasn't on my phone, right? The whole body mind connection I did not get
Uh-huh.
for a very long time. But for me, it was ulcers. I had ulcers and that what kept appearing. And so it was just this constant blood that would keep showing up. And, the doctor that I went to, the GI doctor, she is the one who just kept telling me, like, you're not feeling it. You're not feeling your emotions. And it just would make me so angry. I'm like, I'm bleeding. Why aren't you seeing that? And she's like, if that was the problem, I would
Mm.
fix it. But that's not it. You're not in touch with your emotions. And so this was not overnight. This took me a very long time to finally grasp. Um, and so I did inner child work, right? Like, I couldn't even understand how I was supposed to feel anything. And so that was work. And then eventually I did some inner child work, and that takes you back for me, as a kid who's being abused and what feelings did I feel then, right? And so, it takes you back and kind of gives me chills even now, like thinking about that moment. But just like feeling that fear and just how terrified I was as a kid, just my existence was just
Yeah.
constantly just terrified. And so the inner child work takes you back there and then it allows your adult self to tell that child, like, everything's gonna be okay.
Mhm.
You're okay. Kind of having somebody that I needed when I was a kid to tell me that, but I'm now that person doing it. And so that was like a huge like release of energy. And my bleeding stopped. So that was just like mind blowing. And then there's a great book. It's called The Body Keeps Score, and it really goes through and explains how trauma shows up in your body. It
Wow.
and how that affects, different people. And
Mhm.
then I see it when people always talk about like, oh, well, I'm really stressed. And so I have this, issue, my hair's falling out or whatnot. But it's that same idea. It's like your body is reacting to what's going on inside.
Yes.
You keep trying to suppress it and fight against it, you're going to continue to have these symptoms. And so that's the idea is like, I wanted more than anything to not think about what happened to me as a kid. I wanted to push it aside. I'm a professional. I've moved on with my life. Everything's good. And I wanted to just make it go away, right? And shove it down as deep as I could and never think about it and never feel it. But as a result, your body then is fighting with itself. And so that's how it's showing up. It's all of these other things, physical symptoms, because your body's like, well, it's there. So in order for it to go away, you actually have to like feel it and come to terms with it. So
Mhm.
I think that's a really powerful thing for people to do is to recognize like if you're having symptoms like, back pain or, back injury that just won't go away. And there's nothing, you weren't in an accident, there's nothing that happened, right? But you have this constant pain of some sort that maybe look at something else than just a physical.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's important for
Absolutely.
all of us.
I agree. I'm a big believer in that for sure. It's is your body's gonna keep doing it till you start paying attention, and hopefully you can you get it and you're like, "Okay, I'm gonna pay attention to this, deal with this before I get, really severely sick." Now
Yeah,
this
that's
is
what my
something.
doctor kept telling me. She's like,
Yeah.
lucky, like you're bleeding. It's literally screaming at you to do
Yeah,
something. And
to do something. Yeah,
now it's
exactly.
your choice. Are you going to do something or not?
Mhm. That was a good doctor for sure, not just prescribing pills, but really making you think about it and deal with it. Now, this was also journaling and then burning your journal was a pivotal moment for you. I would love it if you could share a little about that and the role of journaling in your healing process.
Sure. So when the way I got out of my house was I went to college. And that's really how I escaped from my situation when I think I was a sophomore, and I learned that if I go to college, I could move out of the house. And I was like, that's amazing. And so I figured out, what I needed to do to apply and whatnot. And I got to college. And when I got to college, I met one of my best friends, and she would journal. And I had never journaled before. I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm just
Mm.
writing thoughts that I don't want to share with anybody else. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll try that. And so that's how it started. So I picked it up and I just wrote like forever. It felt like forever, just like everything that I had experienced as a kid. And it wasn't how I was feeling necessarily. It was just all the thoughts in my head about the events that happened, right? And the
Okay.
like, experience
Right.
that I had growing up. Um, that kind of just ruminated in my head over and over, and the things I saw. And and I guess I did talk about my feelings, how I felt about not saying anything, like when I saw my sister being abused, and kind of the guilt that I felt from that. So I wrote it all down in my journal, and then I didn't journal for a bit, because I felt really good after in college and stopped journaling. And we went to Burning Man. I was like, I know why I'm keeping this thing. Like, why am I keeping this journal about with all these events? And when I went to Burning Man, I burned it there. And so I really thought at that moment I was done. I wrote about what happened. I burned it.
Right.
Time to move
I'm
on.
good. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're healed. You're done.
I'm healed. And sadly, that's not how it works, right? It
Mhm.
definitely came up for me again when I was in law school and got married and had a kid. And, again, things start triggering. That's what
Yeah.
your trauma does to you. You don't realize how it's going to show up, but your behavior shows it, right? And
Mhm.
your trigger points. And so I picked up journaling again. I still continue to journal, and I journal. I mean, I have my gratitude journal identifying, what things I'm grateful for every morning, because sometimes you kind of get stuck in like the negativity. And I feel like the gratitude journal always just like changes your perspective of how great,
Yeah.
everything is, despite what might be going on. Um, but I also use journaling when I'm just ruminating over something. Like it just like I can't get it out of my head. And I just write. There's no agenda to it. There's no prompt to it. I'm not going to share it with anybody. And I just write whatever's in my brain, and I just let it all out. And then
Mhm.
it's like it's done. It's like and it's done.
Yeah.
And you kind of forget about what was even in what were you were ruminating over. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's another thing I forgot to mention when people are in this situation. Another big piece of advice is just journal. Just like I know you might not be ready to share it with me, or you might not be ready to share it with a friend, or you don't want to talk to a therapist about it. Just tell yourself, just start writing it down yourself. Just journal it. Nobody's going to see it. You can rip it up after if you want. You can burn it if you want, but just get it out. Because
Mhm.
it's amazing like how healing that is to just take it from here and put it on paper. So I still do that.
Yeah, that is such great advice and guidance. Now, I want to touch on this. In your book, you have a powerful quote. I spent most of my life not saying a word, believing my abuse was so much more than anyone else's that it had to remain unspoken. Why do you think that women are so fearful to come forward about abuse?
You really do think you're all alone. You don't think anybody's going through it. You don't think you want to talk about it. You're embarrassed of it, right? And
Right. Yeah.
worried about the rejection that you can
Mhm.
experience if you tell anybody. And that's what I didn't know how prevalent it was, right? When I found out the stats, I'm like, there's 50% of us, and like I said, that's a low number. 50% of us that
Right.
experience it, but there's not 50% of us talking about it. We're not going around, every day talking about it, but that
Mhm.
you feeling alone and not wanting to share it with anybody. So I think, again, that's
Mhm.
why I wrote a book, and that's why I'm talking to you about it, because I want people to know you're not alone. And once you let it out, you can really be on this journey to live the best life, you can imagine, more than you can imagine.
Why do you think there is such shame around talking about it when, this happened to you, but yet there is so much shame surrounding abuse?
Yeah, it's the consequence of it. Like, you are the person that caused it. Like, you're the dirty person, and that's why this person did this to you. You brought it on to
Mm,
yourself. It's like, why is that? I don't know, but I do know that's how you feel. Like, you have
mhm.
brought this, and especially if it's happened to you more than once, like, which with me, it wasn't just with my father. I had other family members that abused me, and you don't think it's happening to anybody else because nobody's talking about it, right? Nobody has said anything. And
Right,
then
right.
the fact that it's happened to you multiple times, you're like, well, it is me, you know?
Mm,
Or, like the first time it happened to me, I did say something about it when it was my cousin, and I did say something about it, and nothing happened. Everybody just went on with their life like it's no big deal. And so I just think that all
mm,
perpetuates this idea that they can do that, and it's your fault for bringing it on. You were at the wrong place. For me, it was like I sat on my cousin's lap, so I shouldn't have sat on his lap, or I, I shouldn't, been sitting there. I don't know, or I shouldn't have slept with my parents when I was a kid, and so you just
yeah, all
like
these things,
all these
yeah,
things. Had I not done that, then that
it
wouldn't have
would not
happened.
have.
Yeah.
Mhm,
So it's again reframing that, like, you did nothing wrong, right? When people and women,
right.
I still say that, like, every time a woman comes into my office, I say, you did nothing wrong. It's not your fault, right? Because the other thing they start going through, well, I didn't say anything. I didn't tell him no. I didn't tell him to stop, you know, and
Yeah,
it's like, that's okay. Like, you didn't ask for it, that because you didn't say no. That's not how everybody responds, when
mhm,
situation. And so I think that's where it also comes from. It's like, well, I must have asked for it because I didn't verbalize, the no.
right,
Oh,
right. Now let's talk
sorry, that was a
about
lot. There was like a lot of things.
that
That's
was a lot, but it's so good, and I know that it's so helpful for people listening because that's part of maybe that's part of how we help women not feel the shame by be willing to talk about it because that's part of the issue, right? The silence and nobody being willing to share their story to help someone hear that and say, okay, I'm not alone and this wasn't my fault.
right. And what
Um,
you're feeling is normal, right? Like, the fact that you're
right.
blaming yourself is normal, but I'm here to tell you it's not your fault,
It's
right?
not your fault. Yeah, exactly. Now let's talk about the word victim. Do you or did you identify as a victim?
I did not. Yeah, I've never identified
Okay.
as a victim. I know it's interesting. I think I don't know why because nobody called me a victim. I didn't call it was just like
Right.
it became, this is the house I grew up in. And, and now we talk about we're a survivor. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't usually, identify as a survivor, but that's what I've been
Okay.
told I am. But I
Okay.
personally don't go out and say, I'm a survivor
Yeah.
of sexual abuse. I just am,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Right. 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 That's just not part of how you identify
Yeah.
with yourself.
So
Now, is it possible to avoid having a victim mentality? When you're in this situation.
I think that's where the resilience comes in, right? Like, you're resilient, you're not a victim. Like, the fact that you came
Yeah.
here and said you wanted to stand up to this, or the fact that you're saying it's wrong, you're not a victim. You're somebody with resilience
Mhm.
and strength to do what you're doing. And so
Right.
I think it is possible to not have a victim mentality. I think everybody who comes
Mhm.
into my office doesn't have a victim mentality because they're willing to confront the situation and do something about it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Because I do I do believe, I want to believe, and I'm certain you do, for every woman who is willing to come forward, and particularly when, we're talking about corporations and in work, and out in public, but even if it is private, the more who are willing to step up and come say something, it does help others. It does help create, I don't know if it's awareness, but maybe more courage for other women.
For sure.
Right.
That's the whole Me Too movement, just think about
Yeah.
the movement of just, one woman coming forward and how it spread, right? Because it was the first time you knew, maybe not the first time, but it was a big part of, like, I'm not alone, right? You've had
Yeah.
yeah, that you were all alone in this situation for so long. And then hear all these women come forward. It did create strength for other women to say,
Mhm.
me too. And so I think that is so powerful. I think that's a perfect example of
Mhm.
showing how you help others by just speaking out yourself.
Absolutely. This show has blown by. I can't even believe it. But this is just such an important topic. And Alreen, you're amazing for what you are sharing and doing. But before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
I have learned women are so strong and so resilient, and they don't give themselves enough credit for all that they are able to accomplish, all they're able to do, and how much strength and resilience they really have.
And lastly, Alreen, can you let our listeners know where they can find more about you for your information and resources?
Sure, the easiest is just to come on my website, and my website's really easy. It's my name, it's alreen.com, ALREEN.com.
Perfect. And of course, we will have those in our show notes. And we have reached the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Alreen Haeggquist, for joining us to discuss sexual assault within a marriage, as well as the workplace, who to seek help from if you have been sexually assaulted or harassed, and overcoming trauma of all types.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to remind everybody the book, Fired Up Fueling Triumph from Trauma, is Alreen's book. And we will also have a link there as well. And listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at floridawomensLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas and the link to our website in the show notes. Thank you all for listening.